So I'm going to try to stay short on the announcements today. So, and this is picking up my mic. Test, 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 test. Okay. So let's take a look at the calendar. Don't forget that, obviously it doesn't affect this class, but the rest of the week is Thanksgiving, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Next week is going to be the exam. I don't want to get into the weeds of the format and everything too much. It's going to be the exact same format as the midterm, where it'll basically it'll be an existing. So you know how the example that we did in class last week, where it was like an existing page, it'll be two parts. Where part one, you have to. I'll ask you to make some very simple additions, maybe like add a footer, add a card. If it's like 2 cards, maybe add a 3rd card or something like that. And it's all going to be in Bootstrap. So let's. I was deciding whether I wanted to kind of dedicate time. Let's go ahead and I'll kind of give you the 3. Let's yeah, we'll go to W3 schools. Because obviously Bootstrap is huge and you can't just study all of it. But I'll tell you the typical things I would ask. Make sure you know that grid system. You don't have to know it like inside and out, but remember last week we did a very simple grid. And then I think we did cards as well, right? Yeah. Okay. So make sure that's really all you'll have to know from Bootstrap is just how the container works, which there's not much to that. You just wrap it in a div and put the class of container. And how the grid system works and be able to copy and paste a card. So what I mean is you don't have to know this card system inside and out. Maybe I'll have 2 cards on the page or 3 cards and I'll ask you to add an additional card. Or maybe there'll be 4 cards on a single row and I'll say, okay, we'll split these up into 2 rows. Does that make sense? And you can pretty much use anything. I don't remember exactly what I told this class because the rules vary a little bit. But this class, you can use W3 schools. You can use, you can look things up as needed. So that's fine. So you can consider open internet. Obviously, you can't have chat programs and stuff like that. But what else? Okay, so those are the couple things that you'll have to know from Bootstrap. And the basic idea is I'll have a static HTML page. And I'll say, okay, make these additions, add a footer, maybe add an additional card. Very, very basic things like that. And then from there, part 2 will be to turn it into a WordPress theme. Does that make sense? So then part 2, what you'll have to do is take it and be able to break it up into the header, the footer, add and it's assumed it's going to be Bootstrap based. So add that Bootstrap plugin, that sort of stuff, okay? And again, you can pretty much use everything on this assignment. The only thing I'm ruling out is obviously like chat programs and you can't get real-time help. But because you're seniors and you're about to enter the workforce, you'll never go to a job where they're like, make this website, but you can't look anything up, So it's so you can look things up. That's fine. It's a little bit different when you're, first learning this stuff, but I trust everyone in here at this point. Okay. So that's going to be the basic format. And the only difference between this, the midterm and the final as far as grading goes, is just the midterm was 10%. This is going to be 20% of your grade. Just for, like you were asking earlier, for anybody who doesn't know, the grade calculations, I don't do like attendance grades and class participation and stuff like that. It's just going to be your assignments plus the midterm and final. Okay. So we'll do an example here in a minute. There were some questions about, so that's it for scheduling. So this week is review, next week is the exam, and then the week after, depending on how much interest there is, I may or may not do a bonus lecture. I don't know. In the past, every time I've tried to do it, nobody's showed up because everyone has other exams that they're trying to do and other things that they need to study for. Nobody can like just take a little bit of time off during final exam week. So we might just not have class. Maybe I'll just reserve that for people who need to make up the exam or something like that. So I guess as of now, we'll say that the 10th will just be reserved for makeups, but who knows? Maybe if there's enough people that email and say, hey, I want you to cover this subject or something like that, we could do like a bonus thing. So So that's it for dates, and then where's 4828? Don't forget this makeup assignment. Did they know? Oh, okay. So I did see a couple of people actually already turn that in. That's good. Because these assignments are worth so much, 8, 10, 12 points sometimes, that's roughly a letter grade. So if you just flat out missed an entire assignment, it's not like I'll give you 50% or something just to pad your grade. It just goes to a 0. So that's basically an entire letter grade. So make sure to use this offer. Okay. Most people are generally doing pretty okay, so I'm not overly worried. Obviously, there's very rarely do you get a class that's where 100% of the people pass, but for in general, overall, everyone's doing pretty good. Okay, so let's talk about the assignment. And I apologize, I know I haven't graded assignment number 6. And this semester, I just get a flood in the last 2 weeks of grading, and so that's basically what's happened. Is you're definitely at a priority for getting assignment number 6 graded. So the final project, it's basically to create a custom theme like we've done. So your best bet is to start off with the static HTML page and create the theme. And we're going to go through that process again today in class. Today is actually almost going to be just another. It's going to be last week all over again, but it'll give you more practice. That way, on your exam, you're a little bit quicker at it. And so here's the base requirements to use Bootstrap, which we did last week. At least have 5 pages. This is sort of implying, so the menu system, if you follow the example in class, it automatically works on mobile devices. So I've just had people in the past that didn't follow the class example, so that's why I'm writing it. If you follow the class example, it's going to work automatically on mobile devices. You need to use images somehow, and that doesn't mean inside of your theme you have to hard code images. You can just go back into, like if you'll notice this example we did last week, you can just reuse the images that you had for your pages, for your individual pages, and those should work correctly without any modification. Plugin. Did anybody have difficulties with plugins? Let's quickly talk about that. So inside of WordPress, and we'll log into WordPress in a second, but the basic idea is that there's plugin system, and I just want you to research a plugin. The plugins that tend to work the best are things like calendars, what else? Calendars tend to work the best. Contact us forms work okay, but some of them don't actually function because sometimes they're set up to use email, and then you have to point it to an email server or something like that. Some just work out of the box. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which just work out of the box. What else? Carousel, like image rotation, those tend to work good. What else have students done? Things like that are generally good. What doesn't work well is I've had people in the past do like these plugins where it doesn't actually show up on the website anywhere. So things like there's a plugin for doing WordPress maintenance, for like cleaning up the caches and stuff like that. Don't do a plugin like that, because my goal is to it's something to see on the page. Does that make sense? So if it's something that can't actually be seen on a page, avoid that plugin. And I'll show you at near the end of class a little bit more detail how plugins work. And then at least one page must use. You can use CSS Grid, but since I'm letting you know ahead of time your exam is going to be based off of Bootstrap, I would just say go with Bootstrap Grid. How many people find Bootstrap Grid a little bit easier to use than the CSS Grid? Yeah, it's like you just kind of use it and it handles itself. It handles all the media queries. It handles all that for you, so it's pretty nice. Okay, so that's the base. And then what I would say is anything additional. So if you did all this, I would probably still give you like a 90 if all you did was this. Try to go some effort, add some maybe additional pages. Try to give it some sort of, I don't want to use the word theme, but like something coherent. Like think about a real world scenario. Like maybe you want to promote your own photography, which I saw some people did on assignment number 7. You want to promote your own work. That would be good. If you want to make up a fake local business, that's good. Like a restaurant or something like that. Or I've had somebody in the past, they like sold antiques and other things like, or just things like you might, sell on Etsy or something like that. And not a full e-commerce store, but just showing the things that you can, they can contact you to purchase, things like that. So if you just use the same exact example, but you fulfilled all the requirements, I would still give you an A. It would just be a low A. The last little bit is like, I know it's kind of vague, but it's like, how much effort did you spend? Did you try to make it like a real world site or promote your photography or something like that? Or did you just take what we did and go down this checklist? Does that make sense? Is everyone good with that? Okay. And you can generally use lorem ipsum text. Even if you do, like, say for something like you're trying to promote your own work or a restaurant or something like that, I'll still accept lorem ipsum text. That's fine, because it's coming up with real text is just time consuming. It doesn't really add anything to the project. Okay.
You can find lorem ipsum like specifically for a certain occupation.
Oh, really?
Like I found one for, like, you can type in lorem ipsum and then food, and then it'll just randomly.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that. I'll have to check that out later. Is that a little bit more clear? It's just basically, I know that the idea of effort is vague, but it's like, because this kind of brings everything together in the whole class. That's why I'm saying assignment 8/final project. Now it's worth basically, what a normal assignment is worth, but the reason I wrote final project is because I just want you to treat it sort of as a final project. Yeah.
Can we use there's the site that we worked on for the last assignment, the WordPress site, and there's also, I'm building a site just for my portfolio. Can I use that site as well and build some of these elements into it, or does it need to be a wholly new project?
No, you're more than welcome. Actually, some people did so much effort on WordPress assignment number 7, and they already have all the content there that assignment number 8 might be super trivial. So if you already put a lot of content into your assignment number 7 and you feel like you already spent some time on it, assignment number 8 is just like just creating the theme part of it.
Okay.
So if you feel like you put a lot of content into assignment number 7, then you can reuse all that. I'm not expecting you to create anything fresh. And then if you already have content for a personal project or something like that, you're more than welcome to reuse that. As long as the main thing though is that it's still you just have to create the theme. So you still can't go out and download somebody else's theme. The idea is for you to still create the theme. Okay. Any other questions on that? Everyone's good. Okay. And then I don't remember the due date on this. I think I probably did like a. Okay. So right before the exam. Perfect. Okay, so before we get started, I know we're getting started a little bit late, but any questions on anything? Just because there's so many people that are going to graduate this semester, I don't want there to be any surprises, anything. I don't want anybody to feel like I might not pass this course. Does everyone feel like they have a pretty decent idea of maybe not your specific grade, but this idea of whether I'm going to pass or fail? You at least know that. You don't have any questions on the schedule. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with the example. And again, this is just kind of a redo of last week's lecture, but it's good to have some practice on this. That's right. So let's just go ahead and re-download last week's starter code. So you might still have it. Maybe we should rename it or something. I guess I should have renamed it to help you out a little bit, but. So under class examples, and then starter code, And then I'm just going to take this, I'm going to move it over to, and then I think on Mac, if you click it, it automatically unzips for you. Windows is a little bit different. Sorry, I have to use a separate computer. It's just because I have this computer all set up for recording. So, and then what I'm going to do is just rename it to today's date. So let me do this. So let me extract it. So today's the 26th. So all I'm going to do is just rename it. Oops, 26. And then move it to my folder. So my CGS4828. Just so it doesn't conflict with what we did last week. And maybe even, you can even rename maybe like IRC theme or something like that, because I think that's what it's, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So IRC theme, and this is going to be the third iteration, something like that. I know I went through like a bunch of details there, so I'll just give everyone a second here to catch up.
It's the same as last week, right?
Exactly, yes. Only difference is last week we never renamed it, so the starter was actually what we finished.
Yeah.
So I guess we should, that's why I thought of renaming it, because it might get a little bit confusing, because it's the starter code, but it's actually the finished version of it. So that's what so I'm renaming it to IRC theme v3. Okay, does anybody need a second, or can we move on now? Everyone's good? Okay. So the basic idea is, so we see all the different files in here, but what I like to do is I like to open up brackets and then point to that folder. So rather than double clicking each file and opening it individually, with brackets we can go ahead and open folder and just point to it. So IRC theme version 3, whatever you happen to call it. And this is our starting page. There's really not a whole lot to it. It's got some very, very, very basic navigation. It is responsive just because we use Bootstrap and we use that container class. Notice that, remember one of the requirements on the assignment was to make sure that the navigation actually worked on the mobile. That's what's happening right here, is that once it hits, let's say one of the iPhones, okay. So the example we'll do today, that'll take care of the that requirement. And the basic overall process, just the big picture, is that we take a static HTML file and we want to break it up into a header, a footer, and an area where main content is. Now your footer may not actually be an actual footer. Does that make sense? Like, it might just be the bottom part of your code. It might not actually say like a footer with copyright 2019, but that's what they call it. That's the terminology. So the top part of your code, the bottom part of your code, and the middle part. Now, if sometimes you'll have like a side navigation or side content as well. There's that file is available, but we're not going to use it today. That's not the type of site we're going to make, but you can see it right here, sidebar.php, but we'll just leave that empty. And just to help you out here, I have a guide that walks you through the process, or it at least gives you copy and paste type code. So we have our index page. We've got all kinds of stuff here. And the basic idea is that everything above the main content, that's going to be our header. So here, from here all the way up to the top. Now notice that I am including the container. And that's because I want all the content inside to be responsive. If we don't include that container, then it's not necessarily going to be responsive. This just forces that stuff inside to become responsive and and to work with Bootstrap and everything like that. So from there all the way to the top, I'm going to copy, go to header.php, paste that. So just to let you know, so here was the copy point right from the container. And then in this case, the footer, again, like I said, it's just the bottom part of the code. It's not like in this case we specifically have a footer tag, which you could do if you wanted like copyright 2019 on every single page. But in this specific case, we don't have that, so it's just going to be the stuff afterwards. And then what happens is once we're done, is that every single page gets assembled dynamically. It adds the header, the footer, and then the part that's main content here, that's where it'll actually insert the content, which we'll take care of that file in a second. So from underneath that down, that's going to be our footer. So we've got our header and our footer. Make sure to save all the work here. And then we've got our index file. So what does the index file do? The index file is where all this stuff is assembled. Because when you go to the page, I don't know if we've talked about it in this class. How many people are familiar with how an index.html works? Like if you go to a web server, that the first thing it looks for is an index.html. How many people have heard that before? You maybe discussed it in Professor Gibson's course. And so that's the idea, is that if you've got a folder, most web servers, the first thing that they do is look for a specific file called index.html. That's why I can visit irsc.edu and it takes me into the main page. I don't have to go to irsc.edu/index.html. Well, there's other file extensions besides HTML. This is PHP. So that's what happens, is that every time you visit one of your WordPress pages, it invokes this index.php file. And so this is where all the main stuff happens. And so we can go back to the guide here. And this is where our copy-paste code is. I know it's a little bit tough because it doesn't have syntax highlighting, but we want this part right here. So from get header all the way down to get footer. So copy that, and then we're going to paste that in directly into the index.php file. Bless you. Now remember how it works. This get header function, what this does is it's actually a very simple function. All it does is whatever you have in header.php, it outputs there. Same thing with get footer. So the stuff that we just, remember we had the part that said main content here. We have our header, our footer, and then the stuff that's main content here, that's what we're putting this PHP code instead of hard coding main content here. Well, what does this PHP code do? This is generic enough that, remember, WordPress works as either a blogging platform or like we use it as just a regular generic site, like where we have individual pages. But this code is written in a way that's generic. It'll work with either. So you can see some references to blog posts, which we don't really care because it's not going to return any blog posts. But then here's what we care about. This is going to be the title of our page. So in the case of our oil change, that's what would output right here is oil changes. And then the main content of the page right here, that's whatever we happen to put here. In this case, it was lorem ipsum. And it does this as a loop, which you don't really care about too much. Notice that there's a while loop here. Don't get too focused on that because we're not using it as a blogging platform, so we actually don't really care. And then there's just a PHP error message if for some reason something didn't work right as far as it. Again, this is a mix of blogging code. I think we could actually simplify it, but I don't want to try to do that live in class and break the site. I think we could actually simplify it to just the title and the content. But if you use this chunk of code, it'll work if you decide to have your site as a blog as well. So that's why it's written like this. So we've got our main parts. We've got the header, footer, and then this is the actual main part that actually gets the content of our page. But now there's a bunch of little things that we have to do. So let's talk about this style.css page right here. it has a bunch of meta information, extra information that it tells to WordPress. Notice that this is a CSS comment. Remember what comments are for. Comments aren't actual code. They're generally meant to be notes to a programmer. So what they'll do sometimes is that they'll be a little bit clever about it, and they'll be like, okay, well, this isn't valid CSS code, but let me put some extra meta information up here to tell to WordPress about this theme. And that's what's going on here, is that WordPress, even though this isn't CSS, this isn't valid CSS code, they put it inside of a comment, and this gets read by WordPress. And WordPress looks at this and it says, okay, this is the theme name, this is the actual URI. So for anybody having issues, it could be the problem that each theme can only exist once. So notice last week we had V2. Let's go through here and let's modify all these to V3. So IRC theme, so on line 2, modify that. Line 3. So line 2, 3, line 7. Don't worry about this. This is a license. That V2 has nothing to do with what we're doing. Okay. But then this text domain, we can go ahead and change that to 3. I think that's it. Yeah, like I said, this license, this has nothing to do with our project. This is their version, their license version actually is at 2, so that's fine. So make sure to update that. On your final exam, I'll probably already do that piece for you, most likely. Going back to our guide. Okay, so everyone's good with that. So on the style, make sure you understand what this is. This is the actual theme name that pops up. And because each theme can only exist once, we're just going to change the theme name by just changing the version number of the theme. So going back to the guide, so we split it up into a header and a footer, and then we got our index.php. This is where all the content that's actually returned. Then we have to actually include this special style.css. We can't just, you know how normally we could just hard code href equals style.css? Because this is a content management system, the way this works is that everything's very dynamic. It's pulling from databases and files that you don't realize are, certain files. And so we have to use a special function called blog info that will get information about our WordPress install and our WordPress theme, and it'll actually return the location for that style.css. So notice that here's a style sheet, and it wants to pull in that style sheet, and then this is where it is actually located. So we take that, copy it, and then go back to not our index.html, but we want to go ahead and put that in our header.php. Doesn't really particularly matter too much where it is. I'm going to put it right after the meta viewport. Seems like a good a spot as any to put it. Try that again. Okay. So we're pasting it in right there. In our case, we don't actually have any images, but if you did have hard-coded images, so I don't mean the dynamic images on your individual pages. I mean like if you had a logo on your site that was displayed on every single page and that logo was inside of your header.php, you'd have to put this in front, this prefix for images. We did an example a few weeks ago. For what we're working on now, it's not going to affect it. So you should be all right on that. Now there's this special file called functions.php. Now, if you remember, our first iteration, the menu system was a little bit overly simplistic. Remember that we couldn't do drop-down menus. It could only do base level menus. It was very, very simple. For Bootstrap, somebody actually wrote a plugin. It's this right here, class WP Bootstrap Navwalker, that handles all that for you. It handles the drop-down menus and everything for you. So I've already got that included inside of the project. But now we have to kind of activate that. We have to say, okay, we're using this plugin, and this plugin is going to serve as our menu system. And notice that it still refers to v2. Let's go ahead and increment that to v3. And then let's take that and then paste that into functions.php. So what happens is every time you install a theme, it looks at this functions.php, and this is kind of like, this is like extra information. Like if you're registering plugins or you're writing your own extra code outside of like the main page, this is what happens, is that this is the place that you put is functions.php. And again, you're not going to, for this class, you wouldn't have to modify that. So just understand what that code does. You don't have to understand every little bit about it. Like, you know, what's a function with 2 underscores as the name, anything like that. All I'm expecting is essentially that you can copy and paste. And then finally, the actual plugin. So the plugin will, let me think how to say this. So we registered the plugin in functions.php, but then this code right here will actually give us a navigation using that function, that plugin. So the plugin creates a function called WP nav menu, and then we pass in some parameters. So take this code from 31 all the way to 51. And then we replace our existing navigation, this thing right here, this entire thing. So first I'm going to wipe it out, this whole navigation. So it should go right from body to our container. And I'm going to paste in that navigation code. And all this is just a regular old Bootstrap navigation, but notice that normally where we would have our menu items, we're calling this WP nav menu function. Like I mentioned before, Bootstrap code tends to be very, very, very verbose, but what they do to combat that is they just make it on their site that you can copy, paste, modify. So you don't necessarily have to understand everything. You just have to be able to read it and change things. So what I mean is like right here, okay, navbar expand MD. So what that probably means is that, you know how this is responsive? I want to have the fully expanded navbar at medium and larger, but at small and extra small, I want it to be that hamburger menu, and that's what this is doing. I want the light version and the background light. You know, if you wanted to change that, you change that here. So be able to just kind of read this, not necessarily understand every bit of code, but understand, oh, if I want to change something, this is probably where I need to change it. Say you have a 3-level menu, which we're not going to have. The depth, maybe you want to change that. Maybe you don't want to put it in a div, and so on. And that's pretty much it. So we should be able to package that up. Let's just go through everything, each file one at a time. So we started off with our index.html, and then we broke that up into a header and a footer. Now how does it actually populate the content in between? Through this index.php file. It grabs the header, grabs the footer, and then actually goes to the database and pulls out our page content for us. And let's do this. Last week I think, well, yeah, let's just do it here. Last week, remember, the content will actually have paragraphs, so we end up with paragraphs inside of paragraphs. Let's just go ahead and change this to a div. So under index.php, change this to a div. Now inside of header, we had some extra meta information that we needed in that style.css, and so we had to add that here. And we can't just do href equals style.css. This is a more complicated system. We can't just easily reference files. We have to call a function. In this case, it's called blog info to get our style.css for us, and that'll return. It'll say href equals, and then it'll know how to find it from there. So this calls a PHP function to do that for us. we've got our header, footer, index. We just did that. Oh, and then we had our menu system. We wanted to actually wire up to work correctly. So I downloaded this plugin. You can actually see it's got all that plugin information. And to register it, we had to put some code inside of functions.php. This basically calls on and grabs the plugin, and this registers it as the plugin for the menu system. And I think that was it, right? And then, oh yeah, and then we copied and pasted our actual menu. Okay, so make sure to save all. So I'm going to do File, Save All. Make sure everything's actually saved. Which file? Yeah, so you copy from the top all the way down to.
Yeah, I just messed something up at the very beginning, and I just want to get it back to how it was. It was on line 7 and 8.
Was it where you pasted in
The link, yeah.
this?
I messed it all up, now it's all red.
Okay, are we good?
Go ahead, I'll do it later.
Okay. And then so I'm going to close that out because we're pretty much done working there. And then what I'm going to, if I can find it. Okay. So I'm going to go and find our theme. Now make sure that when you have to zip this up in a certain way. This is another area I've seen a lot of people. If your theme fails, like the upload fails, if you double click this folder, make sure that the next thing you see is all the files. What will happen sometimes is when you unzip files, it'll put it into another folder. Let me see if I can find an example. Let me go to my downloads here. So notice that, like if I go to my starter and I double click it, oops, that's because I cut and paste it. Let's do this. I did the same thing there. Give me 1 second. Okay, so first thing that you usually do when you download it is that you unzip it. Now you have to be careful. You can't when you go to submit your WordPress theme, you can't zip this file. Because what happens is if you double click this, it's going to see that. It's not going to see it as a theme. What you need to zip is, see right there where the next thing it gets is all the individual files. So that's what you need to zip. So in our case, since we kind of already handled all that, I go to my theme v3, I double click it, okay, there's all the files. So this is the file that I need to zip. I need to zip the one that when I click it, it gives me all the files. And what's tough about that is that it'll give you a vague error message. It doesn't say like can't find, it's very difficult to tell that that was the issue. So go ahead and we're going to go ahead and on Mac, I think it's just right click and compress or something like that, but on Windows you have to send to compressed folder. Because we're kind of running up on our time here, I'm going to go a little bit faster because I want to talk about plugins very briefly. Okay, so let's so we've got that all zipped up. Let's log into our WordPress account. So it's going to be irscstudentweb.org. Here it still has the old IP address, and then tilde your student number /WordPress2, and then WP admin. again, ircstudentweb.org /tilde, your student number with a capital first letter, /WordPress2, because in case anybody had another class with me, it didn't conflict with your old WordPress, and then wp-admin. And then I think in this class we did IRC, right? Okay, perfect. And then we go to themes, add new, upload, choose file, and then I have my IRC theme v3 zip file here. Click OK, and then install it. And if everything works magically, we can activate it, and we can just open this in a new tab. Okay. Now, very quickly, that was the process. We're running up a little bit on time, but this we did this last week. And just to show you very quickly, if I go to Pages, All Pages, this would have been on our home page. And edit this. What I did is I took, so remember that you can actually copy and paste HTML directly in this. If this is at all doesn't ring a bell, watch like last week's lecture. But what I did is I took some HTML code, and I was actually able to directly paste that in here. Is that what I did? Is I created a, so this is in sign of container, and then we make a row. And remember, it has to be in HTML mode, and then I just pasted in some stuff with some cards. On your exam, what I would typically do is I would give you the code and then just make you make some slight modifications. Okay.
Would you consider that like using like for like this project 8? Would that be considered like Bootstrap grade and whatnot?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So if you wanted to use this as your starting example for, yeah, exactly. This would be a good starting point. And then maybe just rather than using this site, maybe link to real images or something like that. That's fine. Okay, that's pretty much it. Any questions on that? Because we have a little bit of time. I want to talk about plugins because I know we didn't really go over that. Okay, so very quickly, plugins are, I'll give you the 10-second history. WordPress, the reason it got so popular is because it was a very, very, very simple system meant for blogging. It was also very minimalistic. It's not what they call batteries included, like everything's already there. If you want a comment form, it's already there. Most of the functionality in Bootstrap is through plugins. Because it's a very minimalistic system, it made it easy to use, but anytime you want something outside of the base system, you have to rely on a plugin. Now I would say most of these plugins are not actually created by WordPress. So they're varying quality, there's a lot of duplicates, some are, some you have to pay for, some you don't. But the basic idea is that it extends functionality in some way. So let's look at our plugins. And so say we wanted to add a calendar. What we'd have to do is we'd have to go through. Now, the reality is that some of these have better documentation than others. So it might not just be like your first try on these plugins, but I just want you to get used to them. And then a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll require what's called a shortcode. And so whatever page you want to put that calendar on, they'll give you a shortcode. Now, a lot of times with these is that you can go to their website or find a tutorial or something like that, or they'll have some other documentation. So I don't know this calendar specifically, but it may turn out it takes a couple of tries to get this working. I won't do a plugin on your final exam. Okay, I'll assume because of your assignment that you know how to do plugins. Now, you may want to find plugins directly on WordPress, or you can just do the old-fashioned way. WordPress, calendar plugin, oops. And then maybe tutorial, where they'll give you the name of one, plus directions. So that might be helpful. And then whatever page you want to put it on. A lot of these use this thing called a shortcode. So like if you wanted to add it to a page, you don't add HTML, you add this stuff in square brackets, and then you just paste it in like you would HTML. But that'll require a little bit of research. If anybody gets stuck on that, I can help you. Yeah, so I don't want you to get, if you get stuck on that, work on everything else and save that for last, and then maybe, I have a little bit of leeway on that. Maybe I could give you an extension just on the plugin part if anybody gets stuck. Really, that's kind of like an afterthought. Really concentrate on the main part of the project. Okay, so was it for any of the people that were having issues last time installing the theme? Were you able to get that resolved? Did that work with today's class example? Was there anybody who it still didn't work? Okay, and I'll hang out for a few minutes after class if anybody it's still not working for you. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. So everyone feels super comfortable about the format of the exam and everything like that. It's going to be basically like what we just did in class. I'm going to give you a static HTML page. You might have to do some slight modifications where I give you like a Bootstrap grid with some cards, and I might just say add another card, something like that. So study up on maybe cards a little bit, but just make sure you understand the Bootstrap grid system. You don't have to know every single detail, but just understand the basic system. To where I might ask you, so if I asked you to expand it from 2 columns to 3 columns, what you'd want is, okay, I need to go from span 6, 6 to 4, 4, and 4, because it adds up to 12. Okay, and I'll try to give you as much hints as possible in the directions. I don't want you to be, completely confused. But
how do you find those plugins on the WordPress?
So it's under
Your
plugins, add new, and then they have a search system.
Oh, plugins, okay, and then you go to add.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Did anybody else find any category of plugins that might be useful? And a lot of people do contact forms. Those have always been hit or miss for me because some of them will require you to put in actual email server information. Some don't. Some are, I don't know how they work. They must.
And then when you find one that you want to use, you click install now.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. We've got 5 minutes for questions. If anybody wants to ask any part of anything, again, since so many of you are graduating at the end of, in 2 weeks basically, I want to make sure everyone is good. You're not stressed about whether you're actually going to get a diploma when you walk across the stage.
So
Everything's
basically,
good.
the example that we did today and we did last week, we can use that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Assignment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think for most people that would be a good starting point. Is whatever we did today, start off with that, and then just expand upon that. Everyone's good? Everyone knows how to email me?
Yes.
Okay, that's important. Because you might not think of something now, but later on in the day. Does anybody have any unanswered emails or unanswered things that I might have missed or anything like that? Everyone's good? Because next week it's going to be basically I think it's, exam and that's it. So I don't think we're going to really get to talk again. So that's why I'm... Okay. So again, if you think of anything during the week, go ahead and email me. My office hours. So the exam's on Tuesday. Monday I have a bunch of office hours. You can look on the site. So if anybody gets stuck or has any questions, you can visit me in my office. But otherwise, I guess that's it. And congratulations to those of you that are graduating at the end of the semester. Again, I probably won't get to talk to you again. And for everyone else, hope to see you in more classes. Okay, I'll see everybody next week for the exam.